This 5 true strange stories happened to me, my family, and my friends. If you like this, please subscribe to my channel. Story 1. Drive. One evening, I was returning home. I was already turning onto my road, where I lived, when suddenly, about 10 meters away, ahead of me, I saw a car identical to mine, a white Mercedes E-Class coupe. It seemed to appear out of nowhere. None of my neighbors had the same car as me. As far as I could tell, it even had the same last 3 digits of the license number plate. I got really curious and tried to speed up, to catch up with the car and figure out what was happening. But it also accelerated, maintaining the same distance. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished at the turn. I thought it had turned onto another street, but it wasn't there either. What was that? A mirage? Or did I see myself with a slight time gap or glitch in the matrix? I don't know. Story 2. Grandfather. My grandfather was a very elderly man. Despite this, as a 20-year-old, I found it interesting to spend time with him. He was a lawyer by education, had worked for many years as a judge, then as an attorney, and he would tell me many fascinating stories from his legal practice. Often, we would sit together over a glass of wine and have long conversations. A person doesn't live 2 lives, and my grandfather fell seriously ill and passed away. It was a blow for me. On the day of his death, I couldn't talk to anyone. I sat alone in the living room, thinking about my dear relative, and didn't even notice when I fell asleep. And then, what happened was somewhere between a dream and reality. My grandfather appeared at the end of the room, started pouring wine, and with a glass in hand, headed toward me. I began to say, "Grandpa, don't come near me." But he kept walking. In fear, I jumped up from the couch, screamed and ran to my mother's bedroom. I was shaking with fear. My mother comforted me and said that it must have been a dream. After my grandfather's funeral, we gathered as a family for dinner. We, of course, talked only about Grandpa. And suddenly, I saw him again. This time, it wasn't between sleep and reality. He looked at me, smiled, waved his hand, and disappeared. I realized that his first appearance was real. Our friends invited us to go to the coast. Sandra's parents had a summer caravan there. We gladly accepted the invitation and left on Sunday morning. As we were passing through a small village, I don't remember the name, we noticed one house. It looked somewhat neglected, with an overgrown garden. Compared to the other houses, it stood out with its untidiness, an unusual sight for England. It felt as though no one had lived there for a long time. Peter told us that he had spoken with the locals, and they had fearfully told him that a witch lived in that house. Of course, we didn't believe it. Witches in our time? Just fairy tales for children. Nevertheless, we decided to stop and take a closer look at the house. Naturally, we didn't see any witch, but a beautiful black cat came out from around the house and sat by the doorstep, enjoying the sun. I decided to take a picture of this scene, a photo of the house with a cat. After that, we got back into the car and went off to enjoy our day. In the evening, when we got back home, I was going through the photographs we made on that day. Imagine our surprise when we looked at the photo of the witch house, but the cat wasn't there. We bought a house, renovated it, and finally moved into our new, spacious home. The only place we hadn't yet sorted out and cleared of the previous owner's belongings was the 70 square meter attic. And that's when the interesting stuff began. We started hearing noises from above, as if someone was knocking with a stick. Sometimes we would hear noises, which resemble footsteps. It was quiet during the day, but as soon as we went to bed, the knocking would start. We thought it might be some issue with the plumbing, so we called a repairman, but he didn't find anything wrong. Then, strange occurrences began, almost like little pranks. The electric lights started turning on by themselves. We would go upstairs, turn off the lights downstairs, take a few steps away, and the lights would turn on again. This game with the lights went on for several hours every night. One day, my mother, who is a musician, was playing the piano. Suddenly, the music stopped, and she didn't walk out of the room. She literally crawled out. She was so frightened that she couldn't speak. After calming down, she told us that while she was playing, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She stopped playing, thinking that in her concentration, she hadn't noticed one of us come in. But the room was empty, and only the light started flickering on and off. Eventually, we began to get used to these occurrences. I enrolled into drama school to study acting. My friends from school would often come with me to visit my family in that house. One day, my classmate and friend from Iceland came over. I knew that back in Iceland he was practicing some sort of demon warrior tradition. Naturally, our conversation turned to unexplained phenomena. He explained that there is invisible evil around us, and by entering a trance-like state, one can fight against this malevolence, evil spirits, and that he used to practice that. I decided to tell him about our strange occurrences. He asked me if I wanted him to inspect our house and try to stop all this stuff happening. To which I said, of course I do, because we were already really fed up with all this shenanigans happening every night. He started with the attic. So this blue-eyed blonde dude climbed up to the attic. He stayed there for about 20 minutes. I don't know what he was doing there. But when he came down, he was no longer blue-eyed, but black-eyed, which looked pretty scary and unreal. His eyes turned blue again in about half an hour. He said that indeed, some entity lives in the attic. It's very weak, only strong enough to pull off little tricks like knocking, messing with the lights, or touching someone. He said that he managed to scare it and drive it away, and that it would never bother us again. From that moment on, all the strange phenomena stopped, and we lived happily in the house for 27 years. Everyone has their share of unusual stories, and my friend recently shared one of hers. She reconnected with an old acquaintance she hadn't seen in years, who invited her over. They spent the evening reminiscing while a beautiful, affectionate cat named Bella purred nearby. Time flew by, and as it got late, the hostess offered for her to stay the night. Since the ground floor was set to be secured by an alarm system overnight, Bella was usually kept upstairs to avoid setting it off. My friend settled into the guest bedroom and quickly fell into a deep sleep. In the middle of the night, she suddenly felt something softly walking across her blanket, moving toward her face. Her first thought was, that must be Bella. Sure enough, it felt like a cat, so without opening her eyes, she began to pet it, and the cat purred contentedly. This continued for a few minutes until she suddenly heard the bedroom door creak open. Curious, she lifted her head to see who was there and saw Bella's head peeking through the doorway. At that very moment, the cat she had been petting vanished as if it had never been there. The next morning, she told her acquaintance about the strange experience. Her acquaintance wasn't surprised at all, explaining that her young son often ran to her at night, shouting, "Mom, that strange cat keeps coming into my room."